Well, there was 5 of us on this advisory team. We were 75 miles north of Saigon at a place called Lac Ninh, advising 200 South Vietnamese soldiers. And we knew something was going to happen. We didn't know when or to the extent of how big it was going to be. And waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning on April the 7th of 1972, heard little thumping rounds coming in, mortar rounds. And so these intensified to artillery rounds and a little more accuracy as the day went on, as we figured out that the guy that was adjusting the radar or the artillery stuff was in the plantation owner's 2-story mansion at the end of the airstrip. So once we figured where he was, we told the Air Force that was supporting us, take that house out. I didn't want the guy coming back because he knew that they were coming for the battle because they had warned him he'd flown out the night before in his private plane.
The owner of the...
Right.
Yeah.
And so on the second day of a 3-day battle, 2.5-day battle, it became somewhat obvious to us that it was going to be very challenging for us to get out of there alive. Earlier that morning, the South Vietnamese commander and artillery commander walked out of the compound. Now, we're there advising them. This is their war. And he walks out with his artillery commander and surrenders to the enemy.
Leaving y'all behind.
Chu Hoi. And anybody else that's left behind, because he wouldn't get out and direct his troops to be fighting and defending the compound and so forth. So it was at that moment, or shortly thereafter, that we said, okay, this is our war. We're going to fight this the best we can with all available air support we've got and anything else we can get our hands on. And so we did have, thank goodness, all of 7th Air Force out of Udon Air Force Base, Thailand, supporting us for the 2.5 days. But because he walked out and surrendered, really didn't change the game plan. It kind of made us mad that we're there to help them and he can't stay to the end like a good officer, good leader should do. So that's when the senior staff people of the team started directing the campaign and airstrikes and everything like that. And
those 200 guys that he was commanding, did they leave also? Or
no, they stayed behind.
They stayed. And did they help you? Or?
Not really. Mm-hmm. One of the problems in the South Vietnamese Army ranks, in my opinion, is there was no leadership in the officers. They wouldn't get out and fight or lead their troops. I said, okay, let's think about this. They've been fighting all their lives. Before us, it was the French, then Genghis Khan and his folks. So they've grown up in a war environment. I'd probably be tired too of fighting if I woke up every day. Well, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to go out and fight the enemy again, for 40, 50, 70 years or something like that. That excuses nothing, in my opinion, if you're over there and we're helping you to defend your country and support you and train you and equip you and everything else. You can't even carry your own baggage on this deal. But that's one of the problems we had in Vietnam, I think.
Well, it's interesting though. I mean, when you started off that sentence, I thought you were being empathetic. Right. Look at these poor guys. I mean, all their lives they're having to live a battle every day. Right. And then right at the end is like, that's no excuse.
Yeah, that's true.
It's both, or?
Well, it is. I try and say, okay, let me look at the other perspective on this thing for a second. I understand that. However, this is now. This is us. This is you. And in my opinion, there's no excuse for not helping and fighting and doing what you're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be the backup, even though we have a history of going and taking charge of a campaign anyhow, because we think we can do it bigger and better and more efficient than anybody else. Sometimes we can. But when you're fighting a political war, as Vietnam was, we literally fought it with one hand tied behind our back, as everyone knows. And so from those lessons we learned in Vietnam, transferred to Desert Storm, Desert Shield in 1991, we had tremendous success because of some lessons we learned. And plus we had leadership, Schwarzkopf and Powell, and all those other folks that were in Vietnam that knew firsthand what it took to win.
Yeah. So after they left, I mean, where in that process did you go, our guys are bombing the hell out of them, but they started out with 30,000. I mean, right. where did you get that number at? I'm trying to wrap my head around how many?
Yeah, 30,000, 3 divisions. Each division has 10,000 troops. Now, this is picked up after the battle and intelligence report and everything that they did hit us with 30,000 because their goal in the spring offensive of 1972 was to go to Saigon again like they did 4 years later in Tet of 68. We just happened to be in the way because we were 75 miles up the highway from Saigon. So, they had to get through us or past us for their objective, which they didn't ultimately reach, because at Anlock, the next village, we spent 30 days defending Anlock. If we had not, they would have been in Saigon again. So during this 2.5, 3-day battle, we've got the command post that's got the senior leadership, Vietnamese and American, and then myself and the major were in a different location in the camp. So once the battle came to a head and they literally driving Russian tanks over the berm through the concertina wire, we lost communication with the command post. And so I went out and tried to survey the situation, say, okay, what do we actually do? How many of you, what's going on? To try and come up with a strategy and how we're going to make this work. And so when I looked out there and just saw these NVA and Viet Cong soldiers literally hanging off the edge of the tanks as they were driving around the compound, and plus all those on foot, I told the guy with me, I said, Ed, you stay here. I'm going to go to another location, or find another location where we can hide, let the enemy come through, scrub the camp, and then we'll try and escape that night. So I thought I found a good place, put a wall of sandbags between two buildings, and as soon as we got that last sandbag in place, a big explosion went off. It felt like initially half my head had been blown away. I had shrapnel burning different parts of my body, and I literally saw my whole life flash before me. And I thought, this is it, but it's an unusual feeling, because your mind just races through a scenario of different events in your life that have happened, and there's no continuity to it and stuff like that.
Just snippets.
Just snippets. And so we went back after a matter of time. I don't know if it was 20 minutes, 30 minutes, or whatever the case. Time just kind of lapsed there, and got back on the radio because we didn't have any communication with the command post. And I told the Air Force that was still supporting us, because this is when all hell is breaking loose. I said, you put everything you've got on us and around us. Get these guys out of here, because the last thing I wanted to have happen to me was be captured. So the Air Force did their part, did a tremendous job. Night fell. We went into another location. They came back in the next morning because they knew how many Americans were still in the camp, started pouring gasoline on the roof of our location, and that's when we exited these little portholes, and then that's when they came up and took us prisoner.
They were putting gasoline on there with an eye to burning it.
Yes, Molotov cocktail is the game plan on that. So
and you didn't want any part of
that. We didn't want to go that way. We said, there'll be another day to fight this battle, but not under these conditions.
And so you basically surrendered.
Right.
And when you did that, when I was talking to Tim, he was talking about when they jumped in the water off that submarine, they fully expected to be machine gunned from the deck of the destroyer, and turned out they weren't. They dropped the rigging over to help them up. What were you expecting? I mean, you're telling me here that you're expecting to live to fight another day.
Right.
But translate.
Well, I was an agnostic before I went in the military. So I was an agnostic when I went to Vietnam. And on the second day of the 2.5, I didn't know if this thing was going to go on 3 days, how much longer, but on the second day of the battle, when it became kind of obvious that it was going to be extremely difficult for us to get out, we were just outnumbered, outgunned, and everything. There's no atheists in foxholes, battlefield conversions. I am one of those. And so I just started praying. So after I was captured, I can remember to this day very clearly walking out in a low cloud overhang above us. Now, of course, there'd been a lot of fighting going on for 3 days in the dust and everything, but it was so tranquil, and I just felt at peace, even though I'd gone 3 days without any food, clothing, or sleep, that I just had this inner peace, that it's going to be all right. I didn't know what to expect going forward, but I just felt an inner peace that I'm going to make this somehow, some way.